Hello, we're going to be talking about Chapter 13. In your book, it's going to be covering marijuana. And this week, we're going to be looking at both marijuana and synthetic marijuana called spice. So, begin with, let's get started here. Okay, what is marijuana? Marijuana is a hemp plant. It consists of dried and crushed flowers. This is a picture of a marijuana plant. Cannabis plant. The two main strains are Cannabis sativa and Cannabis indica. And the component that's mind-altering is something called THC. You can see here tetrahydrocannabinol, and it breaks down, and it actually, you will see how it blocks the neurotransmitters, and what it actually does is actually mimic. So take a look at that. So when we talk about the two different types of marijuana, one originates from Colombia, Mexico, Jamaica, South Africa, Thailand, and Southeast Asia. And it has an uplifting and energetic feeling. It actually makes people crave food, and it provides pain relief from certain ailments. The other type of cannabis, Cannabis indica, originates from hash-producing countries, and it's from very warm climates like Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Turkey, Morocco, and Tibet. It causes the body to relax, stress relief, calmness, and serenity, and has a lower THC content than sativa. But one of the things you need to know is that from the derivatives from the marijuana plants, that they have different ways of going about it. Often it's grown in water, and some kinds, popular kinds are called Kind Bud Dro, 30s, AK-47, and Blueberry. Their average concentration of THC, the mind-altering component, is 9.6% and higher. Now, hashish is different in that it comes from more pure form of resin, from flowers to female plant, and it has a higher THC level at 12.1%, 7.03% for non-domestic. So here's the big thing, and then they've also seen it higher. So one of the things that's more difficult to find in the United States, and one of the things I want to point out is that the THC levels vary based on the type of marijuana plant, and this also is important for people to understand when they're consuming marijuana or going about buying marijuana from one of these legal places. They don't know what the THC level per se is. It's not an FDA standardized item. So there's also a thing called marijuana wax, also known as wax, earwax, butter, and shatter. And it's the most powerful, and it's 80% pure THC. It produces a very quick high off, similar to a hallucinogenic drug. So in other words, someone can actually get to the point of not having that calm, energetic feeling, and it pushes into a psychedelic and mind-altering state. Ganja is another variation. It's produced in India, and largely produced in India, and it consists of the dry tops of female plants. The term is also used as slang for marijuana, pot, weed, and reefer. So this is the physiological effects. In the brain, the THC activates the reward system, right, the limbic reward system, and it stimulates the brain cells to release the chemical dopamine. Remember, we've heard about this neurotransmitter called dopamine that makes people feel like they're going to anticipate an award. The central nervous system, and it alters the mood, memory, coordination, and self-perception. It can damage the lungs, and as far as cardiovascular, it limits the oxygen that can be carried to the heart. It affects the sympathetic nervous system, increasing vasodilation in the genitals and delaying ejaculation. And high doses can decrease sexual desire. So those are the physiological effects. I want you to watch this reward center video. Now, it's about 3 minutes long. Let's see if I can actually play it in here. That would be kind of cool. So it's going out. And so let's just watch this together. I'm going to get the volume up. And when you watch this video, I want you to watch for how how it mimics
Dopamine transporters in the presynaptic
one of the
neuron are not
neurotransmitters.
the only things that control how much dopamine is released or how often. Other nearby neurons also play important roles in regulating neural signals. For example, an inhibitory neuron near the dopamine presynaptic cell can reduce the amount of dopamine delivered to the synapse by releasing the neurotransmitter GABA. Inhibitory GABA signals change in response to local brain activity, adjusting the amount of dopamine released by stimulated dopamine neurons.
GABA.
Endocannabinoids are neurotransmitters that can indirectly affect dopamine signals by modifying the activity of other neurotransmitters, such as GABA. Endocannabinoids, like dopamine, bind to specific receptor proteins located on the surface of some cells. Depending on its current level of activity, the presynaptic dopamine neuron can produce endocannabinoid molecules. These molecules bind to cannabinoid receptors on the adjacent GABA neuron, reducing the amount of GABA it releases. Inhibiting GABA neurons in this way boosts the dopamine signal in the reward synapse. Endocannabinoid and other mechanisms that regulate dopamine activity help the brain develop, learn, adapt, and navigate a complex world. Endocannabinoids are molecules that closely resemble the main chemical in the cannabis plant, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC. Because THC is so similar to the brain's own endocannabinoids, such as anandamide or
So look at that. Look how endocannabinoids are very similar to cannabinoids. So again, this is a great example of a drug and how it mimics a similar neurotransmitter in our body, and it starts to trick it. So watch the rest of this.
2AG. Smoking marijuana directly affects the brain of the user.
So this is what happens when marijuana
someone
comes
smokes
in.
marijuana, THC molecules quickly reach the brain. There, THC competes with the brain's endocannabinoids to bind with cannabinoid receptors on neurons that regulate dopamine activity.
So did you catch that? THC competes with endocannabinoids, okay? Competes with it.
Among other effects, THC reduces the release of GABA in the striatum. This reduction, in turn, causes nearby dopamine neurons to release more dopamine. Increased dopamine release produces the positive feelings or the marijuana high. Marijuana use can have far-reaching consequences in the user's brain. THC can activate cannabinoid receptors found throughout the brain, altering healthy communication within the brain and with the rest of the body. This can affect emotions, movement, learning, memory, and decision-making. Using marijuana frequently, especially during adolescence.
So let me stress this, especially during adolescence, pay really close attention to this, because you will see the next part how it actually talks about how in adolescence, if someone's using products like marijuana and THC, they can actually change the chemistry and makeup of their brain, and this can affect them for the rest of their life. Okay, so this is the trigger warning message here.
Overstimulates the reward system and can change the brain's actual wiring. Such use can lead to addiction and other mental illnesses, and even lower a person's IQ.
Okay, so let me stress that last one. Lowering a person's IQ. So a teenager who starts to smoke marijuana can permanently lower their IQ in a sense of hardwiring their brain, and it maybe could be temporary or long-term, but if they're, depending on how much they're using it. But look at that. Addiction, mental illness is in even lowering a person's IQ. This is interesting, even coming from a professor's point of view. When I have students who come in and have been smoking marijuana, yes, I can kind of tell, and they take their tests, they will get lower GPA scores. I've actually talked to them, stop smoking. I know you're nervous before the test, but you smoking before the test lowers your ability to focus. Their grades went up from, one person went up from having a DF in the class, she stopped smoking, she stopped smoking, and then the grades went back up. No brainer, but this is something that's very, very important when it comes to teenagers, especially and young adults, as they're learning and they're setting up their brains for the rest of their life, right? Because that prefrontal cortex is still developing in young adults. All right, so that was the big takeaway now. And now I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint and move on to the next slide. So I really want to make sure that in many cases, I'm going to see that if you really watch the video and the discussion, when we talk about this youth and why it's important for them to not be smoking marijuana, the perception of it not being dangerous because of the herbal, they are more impacted by this than any part of the population, in the sense that it could really affect them even more long term. So marijuana on the central nervous system, it alters perceptions, munchies, and then I love this one, anandamide. It actually acts as it inhibits and it stimulates this too. So other things too, as far as the respiratory system, vasodilation, aphrodisiac, but one of the big things is that it actually also can cause sexual arousal. So it's interesting that you see in both places lowers and then causes sexual arousal. But anyway, the long-term effect of this is that you can see that it's having an impact. And anyone who's familiar with biology, macrophages, this is really important when it comes to your white blood cells and your immunity too. So think about that too. One of the big things you know that is marijuana has been around for a while. It's been around for a while as a woody fiber product. And you know, sometimes you'll see people with hemp clothing and rope. It's been dated all the way back to China and India. Ancient Greeks also knew about marijuana. Marijuana was used for rope and clothing in Jamestown. And also marijuana grows wild throughout many parts of the United States. So this is a question I want to put out there. This is one of the big things I want to put out, is that marijuana is more potent than the marijuana in the 1960s and 70s. And the question is, how much more potent? It's 20 times more potent. So that's one of the big things that people need to realize, is when they say, oh yeah, it's, 60s, 70s, people smoke doped in. What's the big difference? It's different now because of the methods of harvesting, the THC levels. Think about that, okay? I want to show you this graph, really interesting. You can see the psychoactive agent ingredient here, and then how it's gone up each year. So you can see that, very interesting. And so the THC levels continue to rise. One of the big things that people need to know is that children, but let's just say youth in general, types of drugs used in the past month, illicit drug users age 12 or older, so this is looking at youth, marijuana and other illicit drugs, 15, marijuana, 16.7%, illicit drugs excluding marijuana. So what we're seeing is a lot of marijuana usage starting to increase. Gateway drugs, marijuana is often considered one of the gateway drugs to other types of abuse. Alcohol, tobacco, marijuana are all considered gateway drugs. And what that means is that someone could start to use drugs and then they start to use them with other types of drugs. Also, one of the big things is comorbidity. And I really want to see if you guys know this word. So I'm going to throw it out there as extra credit. If you listen to this video, comorbidity is having two different types of illnesses at the same time. Sometimes people will start to treat with alcohol, marijuana, and also tobacco with some kind of illness or some kind of issue that they have. And that's called comorbidity, when people start to use a drug to treat and then also start to get addicted and then start to have other illnesses at the same time, comorbidity. So sometimes people can be actually having a mental health issue at the same time. And gateway drugs are one of the drugs that often get abused for that self-treatment. Marijuana is the most highly abused illicit type of illicit drug, which is interesting because now it's licit. It's legal here in California. The highest use was among young adults. And then we're starting to see a perception among 12 or older who start to use started to use marijuana earlier. So 6,600 per day are starting to use marijuana. So addictive nature when it comes to adolescence. So how people get addicted to it. So tobacco, we know, is highly addictive, cocaine, heroin, but you can see marijuana is also addictive. And that's something that sometimes is a misnomer, is that people don't realize that the body can become addicted to marijuana, that although it's an herb, right, it's natural, right, it's still very addictive. So there's structural factors with it, age, gender, family, background, how that can affect marijuana use, type of relationships, the setting, and also the personal beliefs around drug use. One of the big things is that the higher levels of academic achievement and self-esteem, the lower levels of substance abuse. So that's obvious, right? Also, having affiliation with a religion can also religious involvement is significantly associated with less drug use. So belief systems, having a purpose, having a goal really helps people avoid drug use per se. But a lot of things can play into drug use. But these two factors correlate in a sense that the higher the academic achievement, the highest the religious belief system, the lower the drug use. So that's a negative correlation. So one of the big things is I want to point out is that DMSV, remember that, the book that has all the mental health disorders in it, it has an actual cannabis use disorder. So this means it's considered a mental health illness, and people can become addicted to it. So I want to point that out. So when people start to spend much time is spent securing the drug, is using the drug, or recovering from it, they crave it, they have a failure to fulfill a major role of work, school, or home, they continue to use cannabis despite persistent and recurrent social and interpersonal problems. So you can see that these are considered symptoms. And you can see these other symptoms start to happen too. So tolerance, and then there are also withdrawal symptoms. I also want to point out that spice, and I want to make sure that you look at this webpage. Spice was at one point considered illegal. I mean, not illegal, but considered legal. And then what happened was the Kern County Public Health Department went to the county and established an ordinance to make spice illegal. And if you look up spice, what it is basically, and if you researched it on this website, it's basically synthetic marijuana. It's where they spray THC. It could be over anything. And what people need to know is they don't know what they're spraying on there. It could be mixed in with a whole bunch of other stuff. And people can have all kinds of effects, from passing out to manic, uncontrollable rage. So take a look at this health department videos, and I put the link in there, and I asked you to use it also in your questions. So this is synthetic marijuana, and here it is defined. It can be sold as liquids. It could be sold in e-cigarettes and other devices. And what people need to realize is that these e-devices, people could be putting it into those too. So hence, one of the big things is that e-devices also can be harboring illegal substances in them. And synthetic marijuana and spice are illegal in Kern County. So this is some of the things that I also want to point out, is that a lot of people start to think that they can drive when under the influence of marijuana. Yes, you read that right. 70 to 80% of marijuana users indicate that they sometimes drive while high. You read that. So go ahead and take a look at that. You will find that that is one of the big prevailing issues, is this idea that people can drive when they're on marijuana, when they're drugged. They can't. That is under the influence driving. It's also another thing too, is that people start to lose their motivation on marijuana. So they start to detach, they become apathetic, they have short-term memory loss, they have difficulty concentrating, and they lose interest in pursuing goals. So that type A person goes and they start smoking marijuana, and they can just completely mellow out to the point that they're just like, whatever, I'll watch cartoons all day in my basement. Okay, so that picture of that comes to mind when I see of that syndrome. One of the other things too is that people start to, especially along adolescence, I pointed this out, they can actually lose IQ points, 6 to 8 points. And then they also start to lose academic success. Medical marijuana there is something called medical marijuana, and it has been shown to help with I want to say guacamole, but but always glaucoma, the eye disease. And so it can release that pressure, okay? It can also help with stimulant, beginning appetites back for someone who's on chemotherapy and AIDS. There's an anti-seizure effect. There's an anti-asthmatic effect, which ironically, I can find that a little interesting because if you think at the same time, it is putting pressure on the respiratory system. Antidepressant effect, muscle relaxant, and of course, a pain effect. It reduces the pain. But at the same time, you start to think, are youth being targeted like they were with tobacco? And that's some of the things I kind of want to put out there, is because tobacco was targeting youth, and this is a memo showing it. Is marijuana becoming the new tobacco for youth? I'm just proposing that question out there, putting it out there. And I'm curious to see when you have your discussion if that is something that comes up. So they start to target with marijuana with children, putting the flavors in there. So I wanted to put out there too that here's an argument against marijuana. So if it has medicinal value, what about why can't it be used? Well, there's 421 chemicals. It is stronger than it was 20 years ago. It does impact the lungs, impacts the memory. And I need to stress that although it is legal in California, it is illegal in the United States. So someone who thinks that it's okay to smoke and then you go into work, or you're working for a medical or nurse or anything like along those lines, it is illegal and you will be fired. So really important to know that it is still considered legal by the rest of the United States, minus a few states that have made it legalized. So something to keep in mind. So why legalize? Why can't we've legalized it here? So want to solve our budgetary problems? One of the big arguments is that there are few people in jail for smoking marijuana. Nice. So one of the things is that few people are currently jailed for smoking marijuana here. And what about the regulatory costs? Will more arrests happen and increase with legal marijuana? So let's take a look. One of the things is that Colorado did this, and what they found is they started to spend more. We look at alcohol at 2.7 million, and then here's marijuana. So alcohol still is a big problem, right? So if only we treated it like alcohol. Well, that argument is that you could see at the arrest when alcohol was legalized, the arrest. So what's going to happen with marijuana? And I'm pulling these statistics from a presentation that was in Colorado, and I would love for people to research this a little. What about money making? For every $1 gained with alcohol and tobacco tax, 10 is lost in legal, health, social, and regulatory costs. So what's going to happen when we start to pull in this marijuana tax, or is our healthcare system going to be impacted more? Just kind of like how meth is impacting our system, although it's illegal, is it going to start to really impact our system? So we start to look at the tobacco and alcohol as a model. We'll see that we make about 25 billion in tobacco and tax, and we spend about 200 billion in the healthcare and legal healthcare. And then alcohol, we spend about 14 billion, and we spend about 185 billion in the healthcare and legal system. So I'm going to ask this question. Why do you think that in 2012, such a high percentage of 12th graders do not perceive regular use of marijuana as harmful? I also asked about spice. And the second question I asked is to look around the legal system. And I'd love for you to research and pull in evidence of, is the legal system starting to be taxed more or not? We won't know until the next couple of years to see what it has as far as impacting our healthcare and legal system. But I'm looking forward to seeing your discussion post. So here, this brings me to, and I started to put this PSA question, but you don't need to do that. What I really want you to focus in on are these two things. We are past week 10, and hopefully you're caught up on that. Here's your week 10, 11 overview. I want to make sure you do the discussion post and the chapter review. And when you go to your discussion post, and I'm moving through this, here's the PowerPoint I just did. Here's the overview of the video. Here's the spice page I want you to check out. Here's the two writing points. And I really want to stress that please make this a conversation. You don't have to post long, lengthy discussions, but I want you to come in with at least 250-word first post, just describing either what, number 1 or 2 or both, okay? And then I want you to have a conversation around it. And when you respond, make sure to respond in the thread of the conversation. And then you can post in kind of like themes, but I look forward to seeing your discussion. And I'm going to make this a big group discussion because I want to see what you guys do. Okay, great. Have a great week, and I hope you catch up on everything and that you had a great spring break. What I'm going to be doing next week during the hackathon week is I'm going to be posting more information in week 12 about your final project. So stay tuned for that. Okay, have a great week, and please Canvas message anything you need or any questions you might have.